time is running out to understand one of the Bible's most pivotal, yet misunderstood, divine interventions. Why did God choose to unseal Balaam's oracle, a prophecy steeped in mystery? This isn't just another biblical exploration. It's a deep dive into the previously unrevealed reason that will unlock profound spiritual mysteries you won't find anywhere else. In a land east of the river, nestled on the edge of forgotten empires and whispering winds, lived a man whose name stirred both reverence and fear. Balaam, son of Beor, of Pethor by the Euphrates. He was no prophet of Yahweh, no priest of the Most High, no descendant of Abraham or keeper of the covenant. He was a seer, a diviner of omens, a master of incantation whose fame had spread like smoke on the wind into the courts of kings. His clients were not worshippers of God, but rulers of fear. Men who sought leverage through curse and blessing, who believed destiny could be bought with gold and sealed by spell. Among these rulers was Balak, king of Moab, whose throne trembled at the news of a people advancing from Egypt, a people whose God split seas and shattered empires, a people who did not ask permission to exist. Israel had camped in the plains of Moab, and the memory of what they had done to Sihon and Og, kings of the Amorites, filled the hearts of Moab with dread. And so Balak, in desperation and political cunning, sent messengers with royal gifts, silver and honor, to summon Balaam. "Come now," Balak wrote. "Curse this people for me, for they are too mighty for me. Perhaps I shall be able to defeat them and drive them from the land. For I know that he whom you bless is blessed, and he whom you curse is cursed." These were not idle words. They revealed a terrifying belief in Balaam's power, a recognition that some men, though far from Yahweh, held spiritual authority among the nations. But as the emissaries traveled, a greater mystery unfolded in the heavens, for the God of Israel was watching. And to the astonishment of eternity, he chose to speak. Not through the tents of Moses, not from the tabernacle of meeting, but into the heart of a pagan seer cloaked in rituals and shadows. That night, Yahweh came to Balaam and said, "Who are these men with you?" The question was not born of ignorance, but judgment. For God sees through every invitation, every motive, every mask. Balaam replied, naming Balak and his request. And the voice of the Almighty answered with clarity, "You shall not go with them. You shall not curse the people, for they are blessed." This was the first fracture in Balaam's ambition, a divine interruption in a path paved with gold. And yet, even after hearing the voice of the living God, Balaam's heart trembled not with obedience, but calculation. He rose in the morning and said to Balak's princes, "Go to your own land, for the Lord has refused to let me go with you." A half-truth, laced with implication. He did not say that Israel was blessed. He did not say that God had spoken finality. He said only that permission had been denied, leaving open the door for negotiation. And Balak, hearing this, did what kings often do. He tried again. This time with more princes, more wealth, and more promises. "Let nothing hinder you from coming to me," Balak said, "for I will surely honor you greatly." And Balaam, though already told by God not to go, invited the men to stay another night, that I may know what more the Lord will say to me. It was spiritual theater, a performance of obedience that cloaked a desire for control. But God sees through shadows. And that night, he came again, not to bless Balaam's ambition, but to permit a test. "If the men have come to call you, rise, go with them, but only do what I tell you." And here, in the silence between the words, lies the mystery. Why would God, who forbade the journey, now allow it? Why speak again to a man already warned? Was it permission, or was it judgment? Was Balaam being invited, or exposed. The next morning, Balaam rose with eagerness and went with the princes of Moab. But the eyes of heaven were no longer silent. The angel of the Lord stood in the way. The journey, though paved with honor and wealth, was now a road to confrontation. But in this first chapter, we face a question that echoes through time. Why did God speak to Balaam at all? Why allow a man outside the covenant, immersed in enchantment, to hear the divine voice? The answer lies not in Balaam's worth, but in God's will. For the Holy One of Israel was about to write a prophecy in the mouth of a foreigner, a warning to the nations, a blessing to his people, a vision that reached far beyond the tents of Moab into the stars of Jacob and the scepter of the Messiah. This is no tale of chance. This is a revelation in disguise. And before we continue, if this content has blessed your life, like, comment, and share. Subscribe to the channel, and if you would like to bless the channel, click the super thanks button and leave an offering of any amount or become a member. That way, we can continue investing in research and improvements to bless your life even more. Balaam rose early, saddled his donkey, and departed with the princes of Moab. But though his steps moved toward honor, the heavens churned with fury. What seemed to Balaam as divine allowance was, in truth, divine resistance. God was not pleased. The journey he permitted was not an invitation to prosperity, but a path laced with confrontation. The prophet's heart had tilted toward greed, and though his lips spoke obedience, his soul entertained the price of compromise. So, as Balaam traveled through the narrow paths of the hill country, the angel of the Lord descended, not with gentleness, but with a drawn sword, a warrior of flame and holiness standing before the beast of burden. The donkey, lowly and unclean, saw what the seer could not. Her eyes were opened where the prophet's remained closed. 3 times she turned aside, once into a field, once crushing Balaam's foot against a wall, once laying down in refusal. And each time, Balaam struck her, blind in rage, deaf to the warning written in her fear. Then, in a moment that still stuns the imagination, the Lord opened the mouth of the donkey, and she spoke, not with the snarl of an animal, but the clarity of reason. "What have I done to you that you have struck me these 3 times?" The question, simple and searing, pierced Balaam's pride. He answered her, as if this were no marvel, as if this conversation were natural. "Because you have made a fool of me. If I had a sword, I would kill you." But the donkey replied, "Am I not your donkey, on which you have ridden all your life? Have I ever done this to you before?" And in the silence that followed, Balaam could only say, "No." Then the Lord opened Balaam's eyes, and he saw. Before him stood the angel of the Lord, sword drawn, eyes like fire, the embodiment of divine wrath and mercy. Balaam fell on his face, crumbling beneath the weight of unseen holiness. The angel spoke, not in riddles or ritual, but in raw confrontation. "Why have you struck your donkey these 3 times? Behold, I have come out to oppose you, because your way is perverse before me." The word struck Balaam's soul like a hammer. Perverse, twisted, corrupt. His journey was not righteous. It was rebellion. "The donkey saw me," the angel continued, "and turned aside these 3 times. If she had not turned aside, I would surely have killed you and let her live." This was no minor rebuke. This was a pronouncement of death delayed by the humility of a beast. Balaam, once feared among kings, had been spared not by his wisdom or his prayers, but by a donkey's instincts and the mercy of a God who sees deeper than ceremony. Balaam cried out, "I have sinned, for I did not know you stood in the road against me. If it is evil in your sight, I will turn back." But the angel, with fierce precision, said, "Go with the men. but speak only the word that I tell you." And here, the story takes a strange turn. The prophet who should have died was allowed to continue. The warning had been issued. The blade had been revealed. Yet God let him go on. Why? Why would the Lord permit Balaam to keep walking a path lined with divine resistance? The answer lies not in Balaam's worthiness, but in God's sovereign plan. The journey was not truly Balaam's, it was God's. Balaam believed he was traveling to earn reward and reputation. But God had orchestrated the road to become a stage. Every step, every pause, every moment was now a divine choreography. Balaam, unwitting and still tainted by greed, had become a vessel. Dangerous, trembling, but necessary. For God was about to turn a hired curse into an immortal blessing. He would speak through a corrupt mouth, not to glorify the man, but to show that no force, earthly or spiritual, could override his covenant. And in this moment, we are reminded that God can use even the blind to reveal sight, even the arrogant to deliver truth, even the pagan to proclaim prophecy. The donkey was a sign. The angel was a warning. But the mercy of God was the true wonder. Mercy that allowed the unworthy to proceed so that a higher will might be fulfilled. Balaam's heart remained tangled in ambition, but his path now belonged to the Almighty. Every word from his lips would be governed, every oracle bound. The journey marked by resistance would become a corridor of revelation. And somewhere in the unseen realms, principalities watched in confusion as the one true God wielded a flawed man to unveil a flawless future. The road continued, not because Balaam deserved it, but because God had already seen the mountain where his word would thunder, not in wrath, but in promise. A star would rise, a scepter would come, and the prophet who should have died would be forced to speak of a kingdom he would never enter. The winds howled across the mountains of Moab, where the sky met stone in jagged reverence, and there stood Balaam beside Balak, the uneasy alliance of prophet and king. They looked down upon the valley below, where the camp of Israel stretched like a sea of tents. 12 tribes resting in divine arrangement, unaware that above them, a plot for their ruin was taking shape. Balak, with desperation disguised as diplomacy, led Balaam to the high places of Baal, where the gods of the land received sacrifice. 7 altars were erected, 7 bulls and 7 rams offered. The air was thick with incense and ambition. Balak expected magic, incantation, the trembling words of a seasoned diviner channeling wrath through ritual. But heaven was not bound to the formulas of earth. Balaam, trained in the commerce of curses, climbed to invoke destruction, but found only silence. No spirit answered. No curse took root. Instead, Yahweh, the God of Israel, spoke again. Not with fire or thunder, but with purpose. And Balaam, whose mouth had once been filled with spells and omens, now found himself filled with words not his own. He opened his mouth, and blessing poured out like a river bursting its banks. From Aram Balak brought me, from the eastern mountains. Come, curse Jacob for me, and come, denounce Israel. How can I curse whom God has not cursed? How can I denounce whom the Lord has not denounced? The word struck Balak like a blow. This was not the service he paid for. This was rebellion. But Balaam was not in control. The seer had become a servant, and the message that flowed through him was not for the ears of kings, but for the covenant people hidden below. Behold, a people dwelling alone, and not counting itself among the nations. Who can count the dust of Jacob, or number the 4th part of Israel? Balaam, once a hired mouthpiece of fear, now echoed the promise spoken to Abraham. The uncountable dust, the separate nation, the divine election. What he spoke had not come from his craft, nor from the gods of Moab, but from the throne of heaven. Balak, confused and infuriated, shouted, "What have you done to me? I took you to curse my enemies, and behold, you have blessed them altogether." But the prophet could only answer, "Must I not take care to speak what the Lord puts in my mouth?" This was not the end. Balak, like a gambler addicted to loss, thought to change the angle, the altar, the outcome. "Come with me to another place," he said. "Perhaps it will please God that you may curse them for me from there." And so they moved. Another height, another view, another 7 altars, another parade of blood and smoke. But the result remained unchanged. The voice that spoke to Balaam was not interested in pleasing kings. On this second mountain, Balaam's eyes opened wider. He no longer needed enchantments. The Spirit of God came upon him, and he looked down upon Israel encamped tribe by tribe. And what he saw was order, beauty, and divine presence. "God is not man, that he should lie," Balaam declared, "nor a son of man, that he should change his mind. Has he said, and will he not do it? Has he spoken, and will he not fulfill it?" This was no longer a prophet performing. This was a man overtaken by the voice of eternity. "Behold, I received a command to bless. He is blessed, and I cannot revoke it." Balak stood in stunned rage as Balaam continued, revealing glimpses of Israel's spiritual strength. The Lord their God is with them, and the shout of a king is among them. A king? Israel had no king yet, and yet Balaam saw one. Not in robes, but in shadow. Not in the present, but in the unfolding future. He spoke of God bringing them out of Egypt, like the horns of a wild ox, and of no sorcery, no divination that could stand against them. "What has God wrought?" he cried, as if he himself were surprised by the vision. In that moment, on that second mountain, a revelation shattered the assumptions of every pagan watching. Israel was not merely a nation of escaped slaves. They were the dwelling place of something eternal. And though they heard none of it, though the words never reached their ears, the God of covenant was defending them through the mouth of a foreigner. Why? Why would the Holy One entrust his promises to a man who sold his words for silver? Because God does not defend his people based on their awareness, but based on his covenant. Israel slept in the valley while heaven stood on the mountain. And God's protection did not wait for their prayers. It preceded them. Balak, seething, said, "Do not curse them at all, and do not bless them at all." But Balaam answered, "Did I not tell you all that the Lord says that I must do?" This was no longer a man speaking for coin. He was bound. The words that once brought him wealth now brought him into tension with kings. He could not curse. He could not lie. The God of Israel had made him a trumpet, and through him sounded a truth older than the mountains they stood on, that no spell, no bribe, no fear, and no force can reverse what the Lord has declared. And still the question burns. Why Balaam? Why use a man of idols to speak of a God who despises them? Because it was never about Balaam. It was about sovereignty, about showing the world that Yahweh is not a tribal deity. He is Lord over all, and even the tongues of sorcerers serve him when he commands it. Balaam's prophecy did not originate in purity, but it carried it. And somewhere in the heart of his reluctant awe, he glimpsed a God who could not be controlled. A God who does not require approval to bless or ritual to act. A God who speaks from silence and makes even enemies his instruments. Balak, desperate and defiant, led Balaam once more to yet another height. This time to the summit of Peor, a mountain overlooking the wastelands, where he could see only a portion of Israel's camp. Perhaps, Balak thought, a more limited view might limit the blessing. Perhaps the God who spoke through this confounding prophet could be tricked by terrain. So again, they built 7 altars. Again, they offered 7 bulls and 7 rams. Again, the smoke rose into the silence. But Balaam, something in him changed. He did not seek omens this time. He did not call for divination. He did not open the scrolls of enchantment or speak the names of lesser gods. For the first time, he stood without ritual, just a man beneath an open sky. And then it happened. The Spirit of God fell upon him, not in pretense or fury, but in power. And the man who once traded curses for coin became an oracle of visions not his own. The oracle of Balaam, the son of Beor, he declared. The oracle of the man whose eye is opened. The oracle of him who hears the words of God, who sees the vision of the Almighty, falling down with eyes uncovered. It was as if the veil of creation had been pulled back. Balaam, the outsider, now saw what the prophets of Israel had not yet seen. Not just tribes, not just tents, not just conquest, but destiny. How lovely are your tents, O Jacob, your encampments, O Israel, he cried. Like palm groves that stretch afar, like gardens beside a river, like aloes that the Lord has planted, like cedar trees beside the waters. The blessing deepened. The words took root in eternity. Water shall flow from his buckets, and his seed shall be in many waters. His king shall be higher than Agag, and his kingdom shall be exalted. A king, a kingdom, a throne not yet born. Balaam was no longer looking at the valley. He was looking through time. Then his voice trembled with fire, and from his mouth came one of the most mysterious and messianic prophecies in all of Scripture. I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel. The mountain hushed. The words burned. A star, a scepter, a ruler whose appearance lay beyond the reach of his generation, yet whose shadow already fell across the future. And what makes this moment so astounding is not just the prophecy itself, but the prophet through whom it came. Balaam, the foreigner. Balaam, the sorcerer. Balaam, the man who had come to curse. Why would God open the vault of messianic vision to such a man? Why choose an outsider, a man known not for worship but for bargaining with darkness, to reveal the coming King of Kings? The answer does not lie in Balaam. It lies in the one who spoke through him. For God, in his sovereignty, does not need clean vessels to pour perfect truth. He does not need the righteous to deliver righteousness. He does not need the holy to proclaim the holy. He speaks through what he wills. Burning bushes, donkeys, winds, and yes, even Balaam. In doing so, he proves that his word is supreme over context, over character, over the very mouth that utters it. The vision was not a reward. It was a revelation. And it was not given for Balaam's sake, but for Israel's sake, and for ours. The prophecy of the star and the scepter echoed far beyond Moab. It became a thread woven through the scriptures. Isaiah would later speak of a child born, a son given, and a government upon his shoulders. Micah would declare that from Bethlehem, the least among the clans of Judah, a ruler would come forth. And centuries after Balaam fell silent, wise men, Magi from the east, heirs of the prophetic fragments Balaam had left behind, would see a star rising in the night sky. They would follow it not to a throne of war, but to a cradle in Bethlehem. The vision Balaam saw from Peor was not illusion. It was incarnation. A king not of conquest, but of cross. A scepter not of domination, but of resurrection. And yet, in that moment, Balaam did not understand the full weight of his words. He could not have known the cries in a manger, the weeping in Gethsemane, the earthquake of a torn veil. But God knew. And God chose that day to plant the seed of hope in the mouth of a man no one expected. This was the scandal of divine speech, that the truth belongs to God, not the vessel that carries it. Balaam's eyes were opened, his mouth was filled, and heaven itself spoke through an outsider, because grace does not follow the boundaries we draw. Holiness cannot be bribed, and prophecy does not bow to reputation. So on that lonely mountain, far from Jerusalem, far from Sinai, far from covenant bloodlines, God declared the coming of the one who would gather the nations, judge the wicked, and reign forever. A star, a scepter, a savior. And the mouth that once cursed now carried the word that would outlast empires. The mountain wind carried with it more than the scent of blood and burnt flesh. It carried tension, the aching pause between a king's expectations and a prophet's betrayal. Balak's face had soured beyond frustration. His treasure had been spent, his altars erected, his sacrifices made. But all he received in return were blessings spoken over his enemies, oaths of favor cast upon the very people he sought to destroy. And now, with the weight of 3 failed attempts upon his shoulders, he stood beside Balaam on yet another summit, not in hope, but in hardened defiance. "Come now, I will take you to another place," he had said. "Perhaps it will please God that you may curse them from there." But deep within Balaam, something had changed. His enchantments had failed him. His gods had been silenced. The rituals he once trusted were now ash in his mouth. And the voice of Yahweh, relentless, unbribable, sovereign, had taken residence in his soul like fire in dry wood. The 4th oracle did not wait for Balak's permission. Balaam looked upon the camp of Israel and spoke, not with bargaining breath, but with authority. "The oracle of Balaam, the son of Beor," he began again. "The oracle of the man whose eye is opened." And then, with the clarity of one who had glimpsed the throne of heaven, he declared a reversal. No longer was he merely blessing Israel. He was judging the nations. "Blessed are those who bless you, and cursed are those who curse you." The words struck with the force of ancient covenants. They echoed the voice God had spoken over Abraham, now reaffirmed by a man who had once trafficked in spiritual markets. Balaam turned his gaze not on Israel, but on the ones who summoned him: Moab, Amalek, Seir, the strongholds of human pride and inherited violence. "Amalek was the first among the nations," he said, "but its end is utter destruction." These were not idle curses. They were sentences of divine consequence. Moab, who paid for Israel's ruin, was now receiving the bill of its own rebellion. Amalek, whose hands had warred against God's people in the wilderness, was now declared doomed. Seir, Edom's mountain bastion, would fall. The Kenites, once secure in their rocky dwellings, would be taken. And even Asher, though distant in both time and geography, was named as one who would be afflicted and brought low. The geography of pride was unraveling, and the very nations who believed they could purchase curses now found themselves under the weight of them. Balaam's mouth had become a mirror, not just for Israel's glory, but for the world's corruption. He had come as a weapon. He became a witness. And what he witnessed was justice. Unstoppable, undeserved, and entirely orchestrated by the hand of a God who cannot be manipulated. This was not merely a personal humiliation for Balak. It was a cosmic correction. In a world where curses were tools of control, where deities were approached like merchants, and where prophets were extensions of royal will, Balaam's experience stood as divine interruption. Yahweh would not be invoked. He would not be contracted. he would not be used. Instead, he used the user, Balaam, who had built his name on the art of spoken fate, now found himself voicing a future he could neither change nor claim. But was this just a temporary inversion? A moment of divine demonstration to humiliate the proud? Or was something deeper unfolding? The pattern that emerged on Peor was not isolated. It was thematic. It revealed a God who had no need of altars to speak, who ignored blood rituals unless they mirrored his own covenant, and who chose to reveal his justice through the mouths of those least worthy to carry it. The entire structure of spiritual authority was being inverted. From the beginning of time, the strong had used gods to justify conquest. Nations had forged idols in the likeness of their lusts, prayed to statues that permitted cruelty, and crowned leaders who claimed divine sanction. But here, in this dusty ridge over Moab, that tower of self-declared divinity crumbled. The prophet who was summoned to control the divine became a tool of revelation. The king who sought to curse became the cursed. The outsider saw the Messiah. And Israel, silent and unaware in the valley, received blessing not because they asked, but because God willed. The reversal of curse culture was not just a moment, it was a message. It whispered of a coming age when prophets would not be bought, when blessings would be given freely, when the weak would confound the strong. Balaam's transformation was a preview of a greater scandal to come. The day when another voice would rise from an unlikely place, not to curse the guilty, but to bear their curse. When a crown would be worn not on a head of pride, but one pierced by thorns. When power would be nailed to a cross and blessing would flow from blood. Balaam's story was not a footnote. It was a prophecy wrapped in irony. The man who embodied the worst of spiritual exploitation was momentarily overtaken by the God who reclaims even the lips of the corrupt. And in that possession, justice rang out. The kingdoms that trusted in wealth, in weapons, in wicked alliances, they were named, exposed, and condemned. And though Balaam would return to his schemes, though his heart would later betray what his mouth had spoken, in this moment, he became a mirror reflecting the unyielding nature of divine truth. No one can curse what God has blessed. No kingdom can stand when God declares its fall. And no prophet, however skilled in darkness, can override the voice of the light. The reversal had begun, and it would not stop until every curse found its end. Not in words, but in a cross. Above the windswept peaks of Moab, where altars smoked and kings clenched their fists in frustration, something more ancient and more terrible than politics stirred. A war not of swords or soldiers, but of speech. The conflict unfolding in Balaam's mouth was not merely a theological drama or a national dispute. It was spiritual warfare, waged in syllables and sealed in oracles. Every word that Balaam tried to speak, every curse he was commissioned to unleash had become a battlefield. And what the world saw as failed incantations was, in reality, the unraveling of a demonic plot that stretched beyond human vision. For Israel was not merely another tribe to be conquered. She was the bearer of a promise. Her seed would one day crush the serpent. Her people would one day give birth to the King of Heaven. And in the shadows beyond sight, the enemy, ancient, relentless, and furious, wanted that promise extinguished before it could bloom. So he moved through kings like Balak, through seers like Balaam, through systems of manipulation and ritual sacrifice, hoping to curse what had already been blessed. But God, whose purposes cannot be thwarted, allowed the enemy's own weapon to become the channel of revelation. Balaam's tongue, trained in sorcery and bribery, became the unwilling pen of prophecy. The very lips that had uttered spells against nations now trembled beneath the weight of divine decree. And what emerged from that trembling voice was not destruction, but destiny. A star shall rise, a scepter shall come. These were not poetic flourishes. They were codes of war, markers in time, announcements to the unseen realm that the plan of redemption was moving forward, unstoppable, uncorrupted, undeterred. And it was not the first time heaven had flipped the script. Joseph, sold by his brothers into Egyptian slavery, had once said, "You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good." The pattern echoed now on the lips of Balaam. The intent was destruction, but the result was divine proclamation. The plan was to silence Israel, but instead, God gave her a voice that rang out through the generations. It is one of the great paradoxes of Scripture, that the same instruments forged for evil often become the carriers of eternal truth. Just as a pit became the path to Joseph's throne, just as a cross became the crown of Christ, so too did Balaam's curses become the very words that defended Israel. This was not merely ironic, it was sovereign. God was revealing that no corruption could cancel his covenant. No alliance of kings or warlocks could undo his decrees. The enemy had long understood the power of words. From Eden, where a whisper twisted truth into temptation, to Babel, where pride built towers of confusion, to Job's accuser, who spoke with venom before the throne. Speech has always been a battlefield. The tongue, James would later write, is a fire, a world of iniquity. But when God claims a voice, no fire from hell can consume it. And on that mountain, he claimed Balaam's, not for the seer's glory, but for his own. The oracle was unsealed not because Balaam was worthy, but because God was making a point, that he alone determines the fate of nations, that he alone draws the line between blessing and curse, and that he will speak through whatever or whomever he chooses, be it a burning bush, a beast of burden, or a man intoxicated by greed. Balaam had set out to control God, but in the end, he was controlled by him. The words he spoke did not come from manipulation, but from divine mandate. And in this, we glimpse the deeper war over language, a war that continues to this day. For if God's enemies cannot stop him with armies, they will try to twist the truth. If they cannot prevent his blessings, they will try to counterfeit them. Lies disguised as wisdom, half-truths disguised as prophecy. But Balaam's encounter with God shattered that strategy. Because when the Spirit of the Lord fills a voice, it becomes untouchable. And when God seals a word in heaven, no force on earth can unseal it. And so Balaam, once a conduit of darkness, became the trumpet of the light. Not because he desired it, but because God demanded it. The sovereignty of the Most High was on display, not just over Israel, but over speech itself. And this moment became a monument, a declaration that no matter how corrupted the vessel, the message remains pure when it is spoken by the will of God. The world would remember Balaam not for his rituals or wealth, but for the words he could not withhold. He became a symbol of divine irony, a man who stood for profit, yet prophesied the Messiah, who sought to curse, yet proclaimed the kingdom. And this pattern would repeat through history. Pharaoh hardened his heart, and God used him to display his power. Nebuchadnezzar boasted in Babylon, and God made him declare the sovereignty of heaven. Caiaphas plotted against Jesus, and unwittingly prophesied that one man would die for the people. The enemy plays a long game, but God writes the ending. And every attempt to curse his people becomes another line in the liturgy of redemption. Balaam's mouth became holy ground, not because he was righteous, but because God was revealing himself as Lord over the unseen war. The battle over Israel was not just political, it was prophetic. And on that mountain, where altars crumbled and kings fumed, the real war was won. Not by weapons, but by words. Not by silence, but by speech. And the word of the Lord, once spoken, did not return void. It went forth, like the star Balaam saw, like the scepter he foretold. It went forth and carved its way into history, and no sorcerer, no king, no demon could stop it. For the voice that thundered through Balaam is the same voice that still speaks, and it will not be silenced. The mountaintop echoes of Balaam's blessing had barely faded when the man who once spoke with eyes opened by God descended into a darker vision, one not revealed to him, but born from within. For Balaam's story, though etched in prophecy, was not sealed in faithfulness. He had glimpsed the destiny of Israel. He had uttered divine words no sorcerer should have spoken. But the tragedy of his life unfolded not on the mountain, but in the valley. After the visions, after the oracles, after the glory. What came next was not a continuation of obedience, but a descent into cunning. Because though his mouth had been conquered by the Spirit of God, his heart remained tethered to gold, to flattery, to the favor of kings. And when the word of the Lord no longer flowed through him, Balaam reverted to what he had always known: manipulation. He could not curse Israel with his tongue, but he would help others corrupt her with temptation. Somewhere in the shadowed chambers of Moab, behind closed doors and whispered counsels, Balaam laid out a strategy more deadly than any spoken curse. He advised Balak to weaponize desire, to send Moabite women into the camps of Israel, not with swords, but with smiles, not with threats, but with invitation. To entice the men of God's people into feasts for Baal, into beds of idolatry, into silent betrayal of the covenant they had been chosen to carry. And it worked. The sons of Israel fell into sin. They ate at pagan altars. They lay with foreign women. They bowed to the idols of Peor. The people who had been blessed by heaven's own voice now burned under its wrath. A plague swept through the camp. Judgment fell like fire, and 24,000 died. The camp trembled. The priests wept. And somewhere in Moab, Balaam watched as his scheme succeeded where his spells had failed. He had not raised his voice, but he had raised a trap. And that trap nearly unraveled the very people he once prophesied would be exalted. The paradox slices like a blade. The same man who saw the star of Jacob, who foretold the scepter of Israel, became the architect of their shame. He who had stood among altars now conspired against the altar of the Lord. He who had declared that Israel would dwell apart from the nations helped them collapse into the nations' sins. And in this haunting contrast, we see a truth that echoes beyond Balaam's grave. Divine use is not divine approval. God may speak through a man. He may fill his mouth with fire. He may use him to shape nations. But that does not mean the man is faithful. That does not mean the man is safe. And Balaam, though honored in the moment of prophecy, was never cleansed. His heart remained hungry for what heaven would not give. And in the end, he aligned himself not with the God who opened his eyes, but with the king who promised reward. And when Israel rose in battle against Midian, they found him there, no longer a seer on a mountain, but a traitor in the enemy's camp. And there, by the edge of a sword, Balaam died, not in glory, not in reverence, not as a prophet, but as an adversary. And the scriptures, solemn and sharp, remember him not for his visions, but for his betrayal. They killed Balaam, the son of Beor, with the sword, Joshua records. He taught Balak to put a stumbling block before the children of Israel, Revelation reveals. His name, which once carried awe, now carries warning. He becomes a symbol, not of prophetic power, but of spiritual compromise. A man who knew the truth, spoke the truth, and yet lived a lie. A man who could bless with his lips and curse with his counsel. A man who stood in the presence of God, but still chose the wages of unrighteousness. And so the question burns through history. How can someone see the light and still choose the dark? How can a man be so close to heaven and still fall into hell? The answer is not in God's failure, but in man's refusal. Balaam's story shows us that gifts do not save us. Revelation does not guarantee redemption. God may use you, but if you do not surrender to Him, His use of you will only amplify your judgment. The privilege of hearing God's voice is not a shield, it is a sword. And the same fire that illuminates can also consume. Balaam's tragedy is not merely that he fell, but that he fell after seeing, after prophesying, after knowing. His story is a warning wrapped in wonder, a call to examine not just what we say, but what we love. Not just what we do when the Spirit comes upon us, but what we return to when the Spirit is silent. For what we desire in the quiet will shape who we become when no one is watching. Balaam desired reward, and in seeking it, he lost everything else. He saw the star, but he never followed it. He named the scepter, but he never bowed before it. He spoke of a kingdom, but he chose his own, and so his legacy is sealed, not with a crown, but with a caution, that the God who uses us still demands our hearts, that His glory is not a performance to be borrowed, but a fire to be feared. And if even Balaam, with visions in his eyes and heaven in his mouth, could fall, then let every man take heed. Before we continue, if this content has blessed your life, like, comment, and share. Subscribe to the channel, and if you would like to bless the channel, click the Super Thanks button and leave an offering of any amount, or become a member. That way, we can continue investing in research and improvements to bless your life even more. Long after Balaam fell beneath the sword and his name drifted into the shadows of infamy, one line from his mouth refused to die. It echoed like a whisper sewn into the fabric of time. A star shall rise out of Jacob, and a scepter shall come out of Israel. The words had been spoken not in reverence, but under restraint, wrung from a reluctant prophet on a mountain stained with the smoke of foreign altars. And yet that line, that fragment of a vision, was preserved. Not just in scrolls, but in the currents of divine orchestration. As Israel wandered, as kings rose and fell, as temples were built and destroyed, that star waited in silence. Generations passed, empires shifted, prophets came and went, but still the star had not appeared. Not until one night, centuries later, beneath a sky the color of indigo flame, in a distant land where sages studied signs and ancient texts, something stirred in the heavens. A star appeared, unlike any they had seen. Bright, fixed, and purposeful. It did not follow the rules of the cosmos. It moved with will. And the men who saw it were not Israelites. They were magi, Gentile stargazers, likely from the region near ancient Pethor, where Balaam himself had once lived. Whether they knew his name or only his prophecy, one thing is certain. They saw the star and remembered the words. A star shall rise out of Jacob. And they followed it, not to the heights of Moab, but to the low hills of Judea. Not to a throne of gold, but to a manger of straw. Not to a king crowned in iron, but to a child wrapped in cloth, watched over by peasants, cradled in obscurity. And when they found him, they fell down and worshipped. They, who descended from pagan traditions. They, who walked in the shadows of a prophet who had failed. They came bearing gifts not for Balaam's honor, but for the one Balaam had seen in a vision, the one his curse-ridden tongue had involuntarily glorified. Gold for a king, frankincense for a priest, myrrh for a sacrifice. The Magi did not just arrive, they fulfilled. They were the fruit of a prophecy once spoken through an enemy's mouth, a prophecy that refused to die. And here, the paradox pierces with brilliance. What Balaam could not become, his words became. Though the man perished, his prophecy endured. Though his life was a warning, his utterance became a witness. It was not his name that mattered. It was the message he had carried. A star would rise, and it did. But this star was not merely a celestial sign. It was the foreshadowing of a person, the light of the world, the true morning star. Jesus did not need Balaam's blessing to be born, but in sovereign irony, God had chosen long ago to declare his son's arrival through the voice of a Gentile diviner. The message of the Messiah was never meant for Israel alone. It was always meant to reach the ends of the earth. And so God planted a seed in a place no one expected, in a man no one trusted, and let it grow until it reached the nations. The Magi represent the full circle of grace. Balaam saw a distant figure. They saw the face. He glimpsed glory. They touched it. He spoke of a king. They knelt before him. And in their journey, we see the triumph of God's word, not because of the prophet who spoke it, but because of the purpose it carried. It was never about Balaam. It was always about Jesus. The prophecy was not a monument to the man, but a roadmap to the Messiah. And it is here that we find the true power of divine speech. God's words are not chained to the righteousness of the vessel. They are alive. Once spoken, they move through centuries, cutting through rebellion, defying decay, seeking fulfillment. And when the fullness of time came, that word reached Bethlehem. That star settled over a house. That prophecy led worshipers from far away to the feet of a child who held the galaxies in his palm. The Magi's journey is not just a Christmas story. It is the vindication of a vision once forced out of a pagan mouth. It is proof that no matter how corrupt, the source, the message of Christ cannot be defiled. It shines, it guides, it redeems. Balaam had seen him, but from afar. The Magi saw him face to face, and in doing so, they fulfilled what the prophet's life could not. They followed the light. They bowed before the king. They left changed. And we are left with the awe-inspiring truth that even in the midst of betrayal, in the aftermath of sin, the word of God stands unmoved. It does not fall with the man who speaks it. It rises with the one it reveals. Balaam is gone, but the star still shines. The scepter still rules. And the king he could not curse now reigns forever. Balaam's oracle, forged on a foreign mountain, carved through centuries of theology and tribal expectation to deliver something far greater than a momentary protection over Israel. It was a declaration etched into eternity, not merely for the children of Jacob, but for every soul who would one day hear its echo. When God opened the mouth of a man who had no place within the covenant, who had no lineage from Abraham, no history of faithfulness, no altar of righteousness to stand upon, he was doing more than defending his people. He was proclaiming something foundational about his nature. In Balaam, we see not only the sovereignty of God, but the scandalous scope of his mercy. For here was a man whose hands had conjured darkness, whose counsel would later seduce Israel into sin, whose loyalty could be bought with coin. And yet God placed in his mouth one of the clearest prophecies of the Messiah ever uttered in the Old Testament. Why? Why trust such a man with such a word? Because the message was never about the messenger. It was never meant to glorify Balaam. It was meant to glorify the one to come. God unsealed the oracle not to honor a diviner, but to make a divine truth impossible to erase. And so Balaam stood, unaware of how history would remember him, and declared to kings and nations that Israel was blessed, untouchable, guarded by a king whose rule was still beyond the horizon. A star shall rise, a scepter shall come. These were not poetic coincidences. They were coordinates for the Gentile world, a roadmap for the distant and the undeserving, a prophecy born outside the covenant, yet destined to serve it. And in this paradox, God whispers a mystery that shakes our assumptions, that sometimes the truth comes not through the sanctified, but through the scandalous, that the same God who speaks from Sinai can also speak from pure, that his word is not imprisoned by location, nation, or reputation. Balaam's oracle was not just for the Israelites trembling in their tents below. It was for the world watching from afar, for the Moabites who feared, for the Magi who searched, for us who sit centuries later, still stunned that such holy light could shine through such broken glass. This is the nature of revelation. It is not earned. It is given. It is not bargained for. It is sovereign. And when God speaks, the flaws of the vessel cannot fracture the perfection of his voice. The blessing that flowed from Balaam's lips was not his own. It was heaven's decree. And once declared, it could not be undone. No curse, no nation, no scheme could reverse it. God is not a man that he should lie, Balaam said, nor a son of man that he should change his mind. What he had spoken, he would do. What he had blessed, he would defend. And that word still stands. It was not just about tents in the wilderness. It was about promises that span millennia, about a people who would carry the seed of redemption, about a king who would wear a crown not of gold, but of thorns. Balaam's oracle was God's way of placing a signpost in the path of history that even the nations could not ignore. It was a way to say, "This is my plan. You cannot stop it. You cannot buy your way around it. You cannot speak against it." And for those who believe today, it is a comfort. Because we live in a world full of curses, spoken, implied, embedded in systems, etched into hearts. But no curse can undo what God has decreed. The enemy may attempt to derail the plan of God, just as he did through Balak's gold and Balaam's ambition. But in the end, every attempt becomes another stage for the word of God to shine brighter. The oracle was not simply about prophecy, it was about preservation. God was preserving his promise. He was sealing the path that would one day lead to Bethlehem, to Calvary, to an empty tomb. And even if the voice he used was not holy, the word he spoke was. It is for this reason that the story of Balaam matters not just as ancient history, but as present hope. Because it tells us that God can speak through the unexpected, that he can bless through the broken, that he can protect what is his, even when his people are unaware, unworthy, or unprepared. Balaam's voice became a trumpet in enemy territory, a heavenly decree echoing over demonic altars. And though the man himself fell into rebellion, the words he spoke remained true. That is the power of God's word. It does not fall with the man. It rises with the mission. And the mission was always this: to bless, to redeem, to reveal the King. And so, whether you stand on a mountaintop or in a valley, whether you feel chosen or cast out, remember this: the oracle was meant for you. The prophecy that could not be silenced, the star that could not be ignored, the scepter that could not be stolen. It was all pointing to the one who still reigns. His name is Jesus. His throne is unshakable. And his blessing, once given, cannot be reversed. In the end, Balaam disappears from the stage of Scripture. Not with honor, not with legacy, but with silence. His voice is no longer heard, his name remembered only as a warning, his life a cautionary tale inscribed on the edge of divine fire. But the story he was caught up in, the voice that spoke through him, the vision that passed through his reluctant eyes, lives on. Because Balaam's story was never truly about Balaam. It was about a God who refuses to be confined by expectations, a God who speaks through contradiction, who thunders from Sinai and whispers through donkeys, who blesses through the mouths of those who intended to curse, who places stars in the prophecies of enemies and kings, in the dreams of sorcerers. Balaam thought he was in control. Balak thought he could purchase destiny. But both were swept into something far greater than their intentions. The oracle that passed through Balaam's lips was not his to shape or silence. It belonged to the Ancient of Days. And in that oracle, God made a statement to the nations, one that still holds power. You cannot curse what God has blessed. You cannot undo what God has decreed. You cannot extinguish the light of the star he has set in the heavens. Balaam's voice was the final voice in the mouth of the enemy. It was the moment where rebellion had to bow to revelation, where darkness was made to serve light, where a prophet for hire became the trumpet of a Messiah he would never see. And in this, we glimpse a truth so profound it ripples through all of redemptive history, that God does not merely overcome opposition. He weaves it into his plan. He does not just survive the attacks of the enemy. He repurposes them. He takes what was meant for evil and forges it into good. The pattern is unmistakable. A serpent speaks in Eden, and God declares a redeemer. Pharaoh hardens his heart, and God reveals his might. Nebuchadnezzar exalts himself, and God humbles him to sing praises. Caiaphas plots death and unwittingly prophesies salvation. The cross, Rome's cruelest invention, becomes the throne of the Son of God. And Balaam, who came to curse, is compelled to bless. This is not just irony. This is sovereignty. God does not simply react. He reigns. And Balaam's oracle is the proof. It shows us that no voice is beyond his reach. No rebellion beyond his redirection. Even the enemy must serve the purposes of the Most High. And yet, the tragedy remains. Balaam never entered the story he helped illuminate. He never bowed before the king he proclaimed. He saw the star, but did not follow it. He named the scepter, but never submitted to it. He spoke of a kingdom, but remained outside its gates. His voice was used, but his heart remained untouched. And so his legacy is a paradox. A man who proclaimed truth, yet lived in deception. A man who delivered prophecy, yet died an enemy of the people he was forced to bless. But his words, those words, still burn. Not because he spoke them, but because God sealed them. A star shall rise out of Jacob. That star has risen. It rose not in political glory, but in a Bethlehem night. It rose not to wage earthly war, but to bring eternal peace. It rose in the person of Jesus, who fulfilled every syllable Balaam never understood. And now, that star shines for all who will see. Not just Israelites, but Gentiles, Magi, sinners, rebels. It calls to the broken. It shines over those who once stood against God, saying, "You, too, can come." Balaam's voice is gone, but the voice that filled him still speaks. It speaks through Scripture. It speaks through history. It speaks through the very cross that seemed to curse, but now blesses. Through the nails that once tore flesh, but now seal redemption. The oracle unsealed through Balaam was only the beginning. The final voice is not his, it is Christ's. And that voice calls across mountains and centuries, through prophets and pagans, to declare a truth unshakable. What God has blessed cannot be cursed. What God has spoken cannot be silenced, and what God has begun will not be undone. The prophecy has not faded, the star has not dimmed, and the scepter that was seen from afar now rules with mercy and fire. The mouth of the enemy once spoke it, but now the hearts of the redeemed carry it forward. The King has come, and his word stands forever.